Mawl was once a normal Hundine boy who dreamed of having a better life than what the divine had in mind for him. He, along with his kind, were left in the ruins of the city known as Yorling after the pandemic of a deadly outbreak called miasma. The miasma outbreak came at a sudden and killed millions, leaving the city almost barren of life. Those that survived the plague became severely sick, to the point where the entire city had to be sectioned off from the rest of the world, classifying the city as inhabitable. This was the life of Mawl, who had the misfortune to survive the pandemic. However, he would forever be infected with a ailment that would decrease the span of his life. This meant that he would die at a young age, possibly never to see the prime of his life. He would never get to experience the simple pleasures of life. Just like that, he was denied the greater gifts life had to offer, such as meeting his long-life mate and being able to carry on his legacy and have a family of his own. He would never be a sire, and he would never have the joy of watching his young grow into their own prime. All of this was taken from Mawl on the day of the plague, and the gods deemed it necessary that he remain. So throughout his childhood, Mawl had to endure the pain of watching others suffer in sickness and diseases. The Elkai Dominion would have no part with the kinfolk of Yorling. There would be no cure and there would be no rescue for the infected. They were forever to remain trapped in their nightmare of a home and could do nothing about it. Mawl was accepting of this hopeless outcome of their circumstances. His older brother, Sai, however, still held on to his dreams of folly. He believed that he would one day reach the Babylon city in the sky, the image of perfection that floated directly above Yorling. The city was called New Yorling, an answer to the failed mistake that was Yorling below. Sai believed that he could get into New Yorling and perhaps convince them to help those that were trapped in Yorling, though it was quite clear that the plagued city was a lost cause, hence the justification of there being a new city built above. But Sai was not only stricken with illness, but the disease of foolishness. Time and time again, Mawl would advise his brother to abandon his foolhardy aspirations to reach the City of Dreams and remain in reality, their reality. But Sai, being the older brother, felt it was not only his duty to help his family, but all of the kin of Yorling as well. "We have to keep something alive, if not ourselves," he would tell Mawl. As much as Mawl didn't want to believe in those whimsical words of his brother, it struck to his hardened heart still and filled him with a bit of hope, something he thought had died a long time ago, along with his home. And if he could feel that much, certainly there was something to what his brother was attempting to do. However, one must be careful what you wish for. Sai did manage to find a way inside New Yorling, but in doing so lost his life just as quickly. Just like that, Mawl was reminded why one does not fly too close to the Sunar, for if you do, you will be burned and casted down to the ground, smited like a minuscule fly to the gods above. Perhaps this was a sign from the divine not to yearn for too much, for the gift of life from the grip of death was to be enough. Mawl watched the life of his older brother fade from his eyes, the hole in his head oozing blood. The sheer image should have been enough to have him sprawling away in terror, but Mawl was frozen in place. He should have been dead, yet there he remained. He was finally able to escape that horrible vision, leaving the body of his brother behind, never to be seen nor thought of again. For years, Mawl and his crew continued to live life in Yorling, but the memory of Sai lived on in each of their hearts. And despite everything that happened to him, Mawl gradually became a believer, much like his brother. He still remembered what he had said to be him before he was killed, and that quote would find a home within Mawl, and from within grew into something that even Mawl could envision for himself. He began to dream, and with this dream he began to plan. He planned to get into New Yorling and carry on his brother's legacy. But he would not make the same mistakes of his brother. He would have to be careful and cautious going forward, but he would seek to carry out his dream nonetheless. Realizing that he could not do it alone, and wishing not to endanger the lives of his friends, Mawl would confide in the divine above. Despite his disposition with them, seeing them as the ones responsible for the state of Yorling, Mawl began to reach out to them. Though he was never taught just how one would pray to the gods, or even converse with them, His instincts led him towards the identity of the Lunus. It is believed that the Lunus had been around long before the creation of Ain, having been created by the Fallen One before being abandoned once its short life was unexpectedly snuffed out. Few believe the myth that there still beats life inside of the large orb. And it's this life that was believed to be the very first born of the Fallen One, making it a demigod by birthright. And it was this very same demigod that Mawl found himself confiding in, for he too felt there was something to the pale planet, other than it being just a big white sphere in the night sky. Some nights he found himself staring up at the Luna and feeling a sensation wave over him, a sensation he couldn't explain. It was like a gentle caress that made him wonder if the Lunus itself was lonely. Having been up there for so long with no other planet in sight, save for the Sunar, but the Sunar can only be seen when the Luna is not in the sky. So they were polar opposites, never to be seen by the other and never to meet, much like the two cities, Yorleng and New Yorleng. With that in mind, Mawl began to feel sympathy with the Luna. It was strange how one can sympathize with something that was seemingly void of feelings and emotions, let alone life, so he thought. But there he was, talking with the loon, and even consoling it whenever he'd feel a wave of sadness come over him. Then it came to him in a startling whisper, a voice that spoke softly and quietly to him. He'd look around and even began to question his own sanity, that maybe he had broken himself from believing in things he shouldn't have for too long. He tried to make sense of it, clearing his mind and even having dialogues to himself, though the voice he heard within his mind persisted. It spoke to him in clear sentences that differentiated from Mawl's own thoughts. This alarmed him, so much so that Mawl would attempt to flee from the voice. He would not speak of it with his friends who were curious over his contrasting odd behavior upon returning to their hideout. He started staying away inside of his room, where he could be heard mumbling to himself behind the door, or was it someone within the room with him? His friends couldn't tell, but they were worried for him. Alone in his room, Mawl struggled with the voice and his own identity. It was becoming difficult for him to tell the difference between he and this voice, and he feared for his sanity. To steel himself, Mawl would begin to focus on this voice inside his head. Alone in his room, he'd sit in the middle of the floor, legs crossed and eyes closed, and silenced himself so that he could better hear the voice. It spoke calmly and quietly, and though there was no visual to the voice, the tone seemed to be male in nature. It was like hearing the voice of a small child, a child that was scared and lonely. There was a hint of sadness to the way it talked to him, and what it would say conveyed to Mawl that perhaps this spirit of the Luna needed his help. It would ask Mawl questions. It wondered if he too was alone like it, if he felt alone and afraid. Mawl considered the questions. Though he had friends like Dirge, Ace and Inqui to keep him company and never was alone, he never stopped to think if he felt alone. Though he was surrounded by others, did that stop him from being alone? Did he feel alone despite his crew? He believed in himself and his crew to be true, that their friendship was based on reality and their kinship with one another solid. But was he using his crew as an excuse not to feel alone? If so, what was wrong with that? Mawl would go into lengthy detail about his feelings when it came to his friends, what they meant to him and why he had them in the first place. How connected he felt with each and every one of them. He never treated neither of them differently and saw them all as equals to him. He did what he could to explain this to the voice, who seemed to understand and began to sound even worse than before. The sad tone in its inflections could be felt by Mawl, who did his best to quell the sadness. He would spend the majority of his time locked up in his room, talking with the voice. Over time, the spirit of the Luna began to sound more jovial, the more time it spent with Mawl, and seemed happy, which relieved Mawl. But with all that time spent with the voice, meant that he was spending less time with his friends. It would be felt throughout Mawl's crew that the lack of his presence was beginning to affect the relationship of the pack on an emotional level, something that Dirge would personally bring up with Mawl. He was permitted to enter Mawl's room, where they would talk for hours about Mawl's mental condition. How this voice was taking over Mawl's life, whether he realized or not. Faced this truth, Mawl began to withdraw himself from the voice in his head. He no longer spent hours in his room talking to no one but himself, and instead put focus on being with his crew and getting back to doing the things they enjoyed. Through all of this, Mawl had forgotten the plan to enter New Yorleng. It was as if his mind was preoccupied with just going on with his life, but the voice would one day remind him of who he was meant to be. It promised to Mawl that it could get him inside of New Yorleng and help him complete the legacy of his dead brother. Hearing this spurred Mawl to start up his dream of infiltrating New Yorleng again, but this time he would not seek the aid of Kindle there. No, he would hold them all responsible for the horrific trauma they all had a hand in creating for those who had to live in the nightmare. He wanted revenge, but knew not how. The voice then promised to Mawl that he would provide him the ways to fulfill his destiny and hold those accountable for not only killing his brother, but ruining their lives as well. He promised that he could make Mawl into someone greater than he ever imagined. All of this piqued Mawl's interest and reignited the vengeful fire inside of him. He had always hated the Babylon city in the sky that took the life of his brother and snubbed the noises of those below them. Now it was time to strike back. The voice insisted that Mawl completely put his trust in it to deliver on its promise to him. Seeing no other way, Mawl would agree to this and return to the site where the sliver of the portal taken to New Yorleng remained. Rattled with traumatic fear that Mawl would only feel upon being around that God's forsaken portal, but armoured with his faith in the lunar spirit, Mawl neared the portal once again. He felt the voice halt him directly in front of the portal and told him to wait. Mawl stood before the portal. There was a silence for seconds that seemed to last far too long. Then he could feel a strange sensation come away from his body, as if something had left him. He swore that whatever had left his body could be seen slipping through the slim portal. It was like seeing something white and transparent whisk away. He felt a shortness of breath as the white spirit wisp disappeared into the portal. He felt the voice whisper to him to remain where he was. Mawl didn't question what was going on, nor did he question the doings of the spirit. He would just stand there and watch the portal, waiting for the spirit's return to him. For another uncomfortable amount of time, the spirit finally returned into his body, where he could clearly hear its voice inside his head once more. It told him that he had nothing to fear any longer, that he could enter the portal without harm to him. Somehow Mawl believed this to be true, and believed that the spirit held no ill intent to him, for he felt the shared special connection with the spirit. It was an unspoken bond that the two of them shared. It was all like walking in a haze for Mawl. He didn't remember much of when he stepped into the portal, nor did he remember leaving. All he remembered was the soft reassuring of the lunar spirit speaking to him, letting him know that everything was going to be all right, and in saying so, Mawl put his complete trust and faith in this disembodied voice of the moon from then on. The two of them would remain connected with one another, and Mawl would continue to confide in the voice. There would be moments, however, when the voice inside his head would begin to take on a different tone. It would speak to him in a deeper, heavier voice, its once friendly suggestions taking on a more demanding approach, something that worried Mawl. On those days, he would find himself locked in a struggle for control with the voice. He would have visions of his own spirit fighting with the spirit of the lunar, who was depicted as something Mawl was not expecting. Rather than seeing a wispy white form, the lunar spirit took on a form that was a bold red. It stood at the same height as Mawl, but its shape and form seemed unstable, like the very outlines of its body was struggling to contain itself, which contorted every which way and twisted in an unsettling matter. Looking at this form for too long would force Mawl to turn his gaze away, which would then break the struggle of the two. Giving in to the red spirit's intentions and thus allowing him to have control over Mawl's body. With the red spirit in control, many of Mawl's actions did not align with who Mawl was. Despite his desire for revenge, the methods of getting there did not speak for Mawl, nor did they reflect who he was as a proud hunding, but it did get him to where he needed to be. He grew up in such a world where it was crucial to eat your own kind, and in that world you did what you had to do. So even if it meant that he'd still be forced to take the life of another to get what he wanted, so be it. And it was this kind of commitment to his dreams and goals that would still hold his friends close to him and convince them to stay by his side, as not only his loyal friends, but as his pack. And it was this unflinching conviction that convinced them to give themselves to Mawl and see him as their alpha, now and always. He had did the impossible for he and his kind. He was able to find a way inside New Yorleng, and from there managed to integrate more of his kindle into the perfect city in the sky. No more did they have to suffer the infectious city down below. No more did they have to squabble for food and shelter, and endanger their lives for the sake of their own, killing one another, just to live another day. They were able to seize the day of a brighter future, and much like everything else they came across, they would claim it as their own in the name of the Sterlings.